author, speaker, and collector of goldfish. And so the research will tell you that if I've been referred to work with you, then I'm upwards of 4 times as valuable to you over my lifetime than somebody who's been traditionally acquired. Look, let's actually own the flaw and do more of it. So they did an entire campaign where they did a blind taste test with consumers, and they compared Buckley's to things like trash bag leakage, sweaty gym socks, public restroom puddle, and every time people picked the other thing, they didn't pick Buckley's. By doing so, within a year, they went from just 2% of the market, they went up to 11% of the market.
Alternate profession could have been?
Could have been comedian.
Hello, fellows. Welcome to the next episode of Jagged with Just Ravi. Subscribe to my channel for conversations at the edge with thought leaders from the branding, marketing, and the business world. Conversations that ignite new ideas with rough and sharp edges. Hi, Stan. So nice to have you on my show.
Yeah, honored to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
If I requested you to tweet your profile, what would you say?
So, author, speaker, and collector of goldfish.
Literally?
Well, goldfish is a metaphor, and there's now a whole series of about 17 books in the series. So yeah, I've collected over 5,000 case studies to be part of this series.
Awesome. So 17 books. Okay. I mean, that I also didn't know that 17. Wow. So
11 colors and 17 total. Some are, that includes like 2.0 versions, as well as some industry specific versions of the colors.
Yeah. Like you did an additional one for service cases. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So like you said, the goldfish inspired the series. Of course, there's a story and we all want to know. And also because your current book is Black Goldfish, 10 Keys to Creating a Differentiated Experience. There it is, guys.
Right.
So why black? Because there is a logic there as well. And why goldfish? Why don't we start there?
Sure. So I'll start with the goldfish first. So it's a metaphor for growth, and growth via differentiation. So the goldfish is a little bit personal to me. Do you remember your first pet maybe that you had when you were growing up?
Never had one.
Never had a pet. So mine was a goldfish.
Oh, okay. That's special.
Yeah. So I was 6 years old. I went to like a fair or a carnival, and I threw this little ping pong ball, and I came home with I won a goldfish. So it was my very first pet. His name was Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Oscar was small. And I come to find out later on that the average goldfish is about 3 to 3.5 inches, maybe 10 centimeter. All right. So that's the size of an average person's thumb.
Mm-hmm.
But through my research, what I found is that the biggest goldfish in the world, now not like a carp or a koi, but just an average ordinary goldfish, is nearly 50 centimeters, almost 19 inches. Right. And I see Mumbai in the background. That would be like walking out of, your home or apartment and bumping into somebody who's 3 stories tall, like 6 times your size if you were average. And so that intrigued me. And it turns out when I did the research that there are 5 reasons why that goldfish will grow, Jazravi. And those same 5 reasons apply to everyone who's listening right now. And I'll go through them really quick. Most people have heard the first reason. So if you're a goldfish, the size of the bowl or the pond that you're in will determine how big you can actually grow. So it's a direct correlation. The bigger the bowl, the bigger the pond, the more you grow. And so what's that? This is kind of like marketing 101. Well, what's that if you're in business? It's simply the market for your product or service, right? And the bigger the market, the more you have an opportunity to grow. The second one for a goldfish, their growth is also impacted by the amount of other goldfish in the bowl or the pond. And this one's an inverse relationship. So the more goldfish there are, the harder it is for them to grow. The less goldfish, it's easier. So who are those other goldfish? For everyone listening right now, it's simply your competition, right? And the more competition you have, the harder it's going to be to grow your business. So the third reason was probably the most difficult until March 13th, 2020. Do you remember Black Friday? When the world stopped, the global pandemic. So for a goldfish, their growth is also impacted by kind of their surrounding environment, the quality of the water that they're in. And the better the quality, the more nutrients, the more clear the water that they're in, the more they grow. So in business, that surrounding environment, thinking kind of macro, is simply the economy, right? And it makes sense. Things like regulations, tariffs, supply chain, consumer confidence, right? The ability to access capital. All of those things impact your ability to grow. The fourth, so yeah, that's the economy. So your growth is impacted by those surrounding things you have no control over. Number 4 is for a goldfish is how they do their first 90 days of life. So they are tiny when they're born. They have 80 to 100 brothers and sisters, which is amazing. And so how they get out of the gate, because they're tiny, will determine how big they ultimately will get. So the first 4 months are key in their life. And if they get out to a good start, they typically grow to be bigger. Well, what are you called your first 4 months in business? You know, you're a startup. So how you do in that critical time will determine ultimately how big you get. Number 5, and this is kind of the payoff and a lot of the symbolism. For a goldfish, their growth is determined by their genetic makeup, right? So what are you born with that separates you from all of the other goldfish? And the stronger your genes are and the more that you're separated, the bigger you typically get. If your genes are weak and you're kind of like everyone else, the harder it is going to be for you to grow in business. So what I tell people is that assuming you've already been in business for more than 4 months, right? We can throw that one out. Who has control over the market? You don't. How about your competition? Not unless you're like Elon Musk and you're acquiring them. And no one has control over the economy, right? So the takeaway is the only thing that you control, Jazravi, is your ability to differentiate. That's that genetic makeup. Differentiate what you do, but I would say more importantly, how you do it and why you do it. And if that's the only thing that you can control, it's the thing that drives the growth of your business. So that's the goldfish is just a metaphor for growth.
Awesome. And Stan, as you were talking, it's like it's such a brilliant metaphor, goldfish. Like it easily lent itself to all aspects that you were eventually meant to cover. And
Right.
not just that, it had an emotional meaning for you. I mean, the impact, the winning of the prize, like the Oscar, man. I mean,
Right.
it had inspiration for you. So amazingly fortunate. We'll request you to cover some key nuggets, and that is
Sure.
where I'm saying this is really a very lots of nuggets capsuled kind of an episode for our audiences with examples, if you could touch it, because differentiating and consumer experience, I mean, this is like both are complex aspects for a marketer, and it's getting
Yeah.
more and more so, you know
Absolutely.
with how do you define competition, how do you engage your customer, and are you really differentiated? If you're not, I mean, brands are just trying to be distinct, because you can't really be differentiated beyond a point. But when it comes to
Right.
experience, it becomes a different ball game altogether. And how do you define the experience? Where does it really start? The entire journey, etc. I mean, there's so much being talked about. But
Right.
here, when you talk about the differentiation, I mean, that's the crux of it, isn't it? If you manage to do that,
Yeah.
you matter to the consumer, isn't it?
Yeah. And the important thing is you also give, with that differentiated experience, you give your customers a reason to share their experience with others. And the research shows that I spent 2 decades as a traditional marketer, right? And everything I would do would be about impressions and getting people into the funnel. And what I realized, that marketing was changing dramatically, and that the consumer had a lot more control, and that there was a huge difference between the value of a traditionally acquired customer and one that was referred to the business.
Mm.
And so the research will tell you that if I've been referred to work with you, then I'm upwards of 4 times as valuable to you over my lifetime than somebody who's been traditionally acquired.
Mm.
And the reason being is, if I've been referred, I stay longer and I spend more money. So upwards of twice the amount of lifetime value. And second, if I've been referred myself, what am I more apt to do? I'm more apt to tell other people and refer. So over my lifetime, I refer up to twice the amount of people than somebody who's traditionally acquired. So it's this idea of thinking about the experience as simply taking care of the customers you have, because they will bring you the customers you want. And if you ask any business, they will tell you, they would say, well, what's the best form of marketing that you have? And 9 out of 10 will tell you word of mouth is our absolute best marketing vehicle. And then you follow up with business and you go, well, what is if that's your best strategy, well, what's your word of mouth strategy? Like, what are you doing to promote that? And 1% of businesses have a word of mouth strategy. And so, yeah.
So
you
yeah,
want to
exactly.
jump into
Yes.
purple?
Yes, purple. And Stan, I've listened to your TED talk also about it, and I was glued to it. You
were glued. All right.
I was glued.
I'm big. That's inside. So my TEDx talk talked about this concept of glue being giving little unexpected extras. And so purple was really about finding ways to differentiate the experience and to rise above a transactional mindset. So often business, it's this push and pull, right? To try to get as much value, right? And it's a zero-sum game. It doesn't leave you with the ability to do anything. And so the concept that I wrote about in purple is a word that comes from New Orleans, So in the southeastern part of the United States, Louisiana specifically, and it's a Creole word called lanyap. And it's been around for 200 plus years. And it's this simple idea, and I love the simplicity of it, that if you do business with somebody, it's common, if you're in New Orleans, for the business to do a little something that gets added to honor the relationship. It's not part of the exchange in the transaction, but it's just done to honor and show appreciation for the relationship. And so this word lanyap is a word that the author Mark Twain in his autobiography said was worth traveling all the way to New Orleans to get. And so I love it as a lot of simple things that you can do to either add value or little things that you can do to make it easier for them to do business with you. Yeah. And for that book, we looked at over 1,000 examples of companies that did these little signature extras, and found essentially there's 10 ways that you can do it.
Okay. Would you like to share some examples? Because what I remember the cookie,
Right.
and there were lots of examples. And I think when you're talking about it, it's so clear that it's the intent, it's the essence of giving that extra. It's not a quantified something, but it's knowing also what would be a delight for your customer at that point in time. So that is what is so valuable. And of course, I mean, behavioral science talks about surprise and etc. But making that as a part of your strategy, like you were talking about, to do it, at scale and make sure then it gets talked about. So could you share some examples, Stan? This is really lovely. Yeah.
Sure. So you had mentioned the chocolate chip cookie. So DoubleTree Hotels by Hilton is now a global brand. They started pretty small here in the US. And their signature kind of first impression and welcome is that they give you a warm chocolate chip cookie. Now, it's right when you check in. It's individually wrapped. It's that nice kind of welcome. And it's become a signature thing for them to the extent that they've given away now almost 500 million chocolate chip cookies. And so that's one example. Another one that I like is a category that I call sampling. And we think about sampling as a traditional like marketing tactic, right, to get new customers in. But the research will bear out that your current customers, the ones that you're already doing business with, on average, know less than 25% of your overall capabilities. So sampling is this idea of maybe that little extra is doing a little something extra for the customer, but kind of showing off your additional capabilities. And so I love that as a simple thing. So there's a great example in the book about an ice cream shop in Minnesota. It's called Izzy's Ice Cream. And when you order just a scoop of ice cream at Izzy's, they let you pick a second flavor and they give you this little mini scoop on top, right? And it's such a simple, brilliant thing. I'm a big fan of both coffee and tea. So there's a tea company here in the US called Bigelow Tea Company. And when you buy a box of tea, they have all sorts of different flavors. But I love this because it's so simple. They will just throw an additional flavor into every box that they sell. And so you're giving your customers, right, and the ability to try something else as part of that experience. So that's one I think is really simple.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't have to be a physical something. It can also be just a little added service that you do. Right. And I love that you picked up on it's about sharing the intent, right? And showing that you care enough about that relationship. And 80% of how we view other people comes down to just two factors: warmth and competence. And we look at brands the same way that we look at people, right? We're questioning their intent, which is the warmth piece. And we're saying, what's their ability to carry out that intent? How are they being competent? So the ways that you can reinforce both of those things are by doing these little signature things.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? Little things are never little. I think that is universal now. But to the perspective that you gave on sampling is so refreshing, because most of the times it's always looked at as the manufacturer is just wanting to cross sell, wanting to their variants to get tried, etc. But yes, there is a delight factor because the consumer is getting something more extra free.
Right.
Yeah, and when they didn't expect it. So that's very interesting. Now we move to the pink. Yeah, it is one of my favorite colors.
Right.
And you have an interesting thing there, which is imperfection. Exploit imperfection, defy normal.
Right.
Yes, normal is boring and perfection is boring. I mean,
Right.
it's talked about, but people don't realize how do you make your flaws? How do your flaws make you awesome?
How do your flaws make you, or as we
Or
say
the
in the book, the
FLAWSOME.
things that make you flawsome, right? So there's so much pressure in business to try to conform to being normal, right? And I think one of the biggest things that we do as a disservice, and I used to do this as a marketer, is benchmarking, right? We look at whoever is the leader, and what do? We start to break down the things that we think that make them the leader. And then whether we want to admit it or not, we then start to emulate and copy those things. And that is not the road to differentiation. That's the road to sameness. And so in Pink Goldfish, we looked at over 400 organizations that had achieved competitive separation. And what we wanted to try to find out is, how did they do it? And it turns out that there's only two ways that you can separate yourself from the norm, right? And one is to do more of what makes you inherently weird, unique, or different, as we would say, flawed, right? Because you're standing out, you're different. To own that and do more of it. So that's inherent flaws. The other side is creating intentional flaws. And that's the less strategy. That's the idea of looking at everyone else does A, B, and C because that's considered the norm. If you decide, hey, I'm not going to do C, right? Intentionally do less, you can actually stand out and differentiate yourself. So the 8 different ways is this acronym of FLAWSOME. And it starts with the F, which is flaunting. And flaunting, sometimes it has a negative perception. But if you look at what flaunting is in the definition, it's to parade without shame. Right? So it's owning who you are and not being afraid to put it out there for everyone to see. And so because I'm a marketer and I love strategy, it's maybe my absolute favorite of the 11 colors in the series. And there's a great assessment on how you can understand what your perceived weakness is, because every weakness has a corresponding strength. Would it be helpful to provide an example, a fun example?
Yes, please.
So there is a there's a company in Canada that makes cough syrup, right? What's the flaw of cough syrup?
Makes you sleepy, perhaps.
Makes you sleepy, but how about when you have to actually take it?
Yeah, the
It tastes
taste. Yeah.
it tastes awful,
Yeah.
right? And this company, Buckley's, it had been around for about 90 years. Buckley's might be the worst thing that you've ever tasted before. It's god awful. It's horrible. And so they were kind of in, were really struggling, and they said, we need to refigure out how to be relevant again. And so maybe the strategy, what most cough syrup companies do, is we flavor it. Maybe we reconstitute it so it doesn't taste as bad. But this company, I love this. They said, look, let's actually own the flaw and do more of it. So they did an entire campaign where they did a blind taste test with consumers, and they compared Buckley's to things like trash bag leakage, sweaty gym socks, public restroom puddle, and every time people picked the other thing, they didn't pick Buckley's. And the campaign became, people swear by it and at it. And they said, look, it's not for everyone. And by doing so, within a year, they went from just 2% of the market, they went up to 11% of the market, a 550% increase in sales by owning who they were and not being afraid to put it out there for everyone. So that's a great example of flaunting. It's flaunting, lopsiding, and lopsiding is just really like doubling and tripling down. There's one that's a little controversial. The A in FLAWSOME is antagonizing, right? And antagonizing is realizing that you're not for everyone, right? And you're going to make some people mad. And so what do most businesses do when they make some customers mad? They apologize, they offer a refund, a credit, don't give us a bad review. Well, here's the thing. If they're complaining about things that make you unique and different, then you should use that as an opportunity to push those people away, because by doing so, you're going to actually pull in the customers you do want. So there's a great case study in the book about a movie theater here in America. It's called the Alamo Drafthouse. And it's been ranked as one of the best places to go see a movie. But the people that run the Alamo are super passionate about movies. So when you go into the movie, they have a pretty strict rule that you can't talk and you can't text on your phone. Once the previews begin, they'll warn you once, but then they'll kick you out. And so there was a woman who, and this is, if you go on YouTube, it's hilarious, but she got kicked out for talking and texting. And she left like a 1.5-minute voicemail that absolutely ripped the movie theater and saying, you guys are horrible. You take my money. I do this in all of the other theaters and no one has a problem with it. And so I love this. Instead of calling back to apologize, they actually called their lawyers. And they asked their lawyers, they said, can we use this voicemail message? And the lawyers, it took them a second. They said, absolutely. She knew she was being recorded because she left a voicemail message. And they then created it as a part of the previews, like a PSA, public service announcement. And they replayed her voicemail message. And then they put it on their blog. It went viral. It got national news coverage, right? And They said, look, we don't want you coming here, right? If you're somebody who likes to talk and text, you're not welcome. But for those that actually enjoy and are passionate about the movie going experience, you're welcome to come out because there's not going to be these people there. So that's antagonizing. Withholding is kind of that doing less strategy, right? So not doing what everyone else does. Swerving is the S, which is kind of not as dramatic as withholding or lopsiding. It's kind of somewhere in between. There's opposing. So opposing brands are really brave. When everyone goes in one direction, they go totally opposite. And that's not for the faint of heart either. The M is micro weirding. So that's very much like a purple goldfish. It's little things that you do. And lastly, the E in FLAWSOME is about exposing. And exposing is about owning who you are and maybe not being afraid to actually share your bad reviews. And so there's a great example in the book from a ski resort called Snowbird, which is in Utah. And people have left 1-star reviews on their site. And they said, this place is too dangerous. Like I felt my life was in danger when I was going down the hill. And they're definitely not a place for beginner or even intermediate skiers. So they actually published in a campaign there all of these 1-star reviews. And it was so smart because they had amazing images of the mountain. And then they said, 1 star, too dangerous, or, not enough. It was just an amazing campaign. And they were unapologetic about exposing those things that some people thought that were flaws about them.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? The self-awareness and the boldness and the clarity about who am I going to be authentically, unabashedly, and and then we'll face it. We'll go through it. I mean, I think at the end of the day, this audacity is endearing because you can trust imperfection better. It's more real. It's like perfection. It's too shiny and too slick, too packaged, and you're like, there's something that is hidden, something that I'm going to figure out. But imperfection and right out there, it's endearing. It's like, okay, I'm going to decide either ways whether this is for me or not. But at least it is what it is saying it is. And to actually own it in this manner and celebrate it, I mean, look at the self-confidence that is perceived by the consumer. I mean, this is absolutely awesome. Absolutely FLAWSOME strategy. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing the entire.
And here's the thing, and what I would challenge people, we've got a great assessment in the book, and there's a 6-step process that you can go through. But here's the thing, many times we can't read the label because we're too inside the jar, right? So part of the process, right, because we're too close to it to see it. So we talk about the first step is becoming aware. So it's talking to your customers, it's talking to your employees, it's even talking to your suppliers, because your suppliers not only do business with you, right, but they also do business with who? Your competition. So they have a unique insight in what makes you different compared to everyone else. And so again, for me, it's the most interesting and fun book in the entire series, because too often we've got 4 animals that are associated as part of this. And the first animal is what we call the cow. And the cow, are cows unique? They are, because they have spots that are like our fingerprints, right? So no two cows are alike because of the patterns and the spots that they have, or their coloration, right? But here's the thing, cows are oblivious to what makes them unique. In fact, one cow could start walking, and what would all the rest of the other cows do? Literally follow right behind it and literally make a path and never veer. And so they do less of what makes them, unique, because they're oblivious to it. The counter to that is what we call doing more of what makes you unique, and we call that the peacock strategy or the strut strategy. And peacocks, their feathers every peacock is unique, just like that cow. But what's the difference? Right? Peacocks are like, whoa, check me out. They're not afraid to flaunt it and own it. Then you have a strategy. So that's more of doing unique. Then you have a strategy of doing more of what is quote unquote normal. And we call that the zebra strategy or the match strategy. And that goes back to like benchmarking. We start to break down these stripes, and then before you know it, next thing you do, we start adding the same stripes as everyone else. And it's like impossible to tell one zebra from another zebra. In fact, what's interesting about zebras, they are black with white stripes. And they will actually huddle in groups of 4 to 5 as a prey defense. Because when a lion or a tiger sees 4 or 5 zebras together, they don't see 4 or 5 zebras. You know what they see? One really big zebra, and they won't attack it. And so they're an interesting animal in the fact that they camouflage themselves, not against their background, but they camouflage themselves amongst other zebras. And that's when you start doing more of what's quote unquote normal, you get lost. You're in a sea of sameness. The fourth animal is what we call the polar bear strategy or the subtract strategy. So just like zebras are black with white stripes, polar bears are actually black as well. Did you know that? Yeah, they're black. What's interesting is that their fur is hollow. So when the light passes through their fur, literally all of the different colors in the spectrum get removed, and what gets bounced back to our eye is the absence of color, which is white. Or like I think most polar bears are like a dirty yellow in color. So it's this idea of actually taking stuff away and doing less of what everyone else does as normal. And polar bears are interesting animals in that they don't travel in a pack. They're not afraid to go out on their own, and they live kind of solitary lives. So yeah, that's kind of the 4 animals.
Awesome.
And we tell people if you want to stand out, you need to be more like a peacock, own who you are and what makes you different, or be more like a polar bear. Do less of what everyone else does as normal.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Amazing. And like you said, a whole lot of understanding would be required, a whole lot of audit of what you do differently, what is your capability and how you're being perceived, what is the association you've managed to create in the consumer so far, and what is the environment, what is the category other players doing, like you started with the goldfish. You
Right.
first understand all of that and then, figure out what is your strategy. But that confidence and that decision that I'm going to be who I am and what's different about me is something that
Right.
I'm not going to shy away from, is a great
Right.
strategy for even personal branding, but requires a whole lot of audacity.
It does, and
Because
that's why the
Stan, like they say, every gift has a curse with it, and you can be afraid of that. Yeah.
right, and what we talk about in the book is every perceived weakness has a corresponding strength,
Mm,
right? So, for example, some people might be listening right now, and they might be like me. I'm a small business. I'm an independent entrepreneur.
mm,
So when you call, you talk to me. I do pretty much everything in the business,
mm,
and so some people will go, well, that's a weakness being small, right? And so some people might, when you go to their website, may be portraying themselves as like a bigger entity and not owning who they are,
mm,
right? But here's the deal. What are the advantages of being small? Nimble, responsive, you're talking to the owner of the organization, right? You're not getting and the irony is that if you're a big organization, a lot of times what do big organizations try to portray themselves as? We're small, we provide that
personal
personalized
touch.
touch. And here's the thing, you should never be ashamed if you're big. That
Mm,
means you're established, you're proven, you're creditable, right? Don't shy away. We're a proven commodity. Why would you want to shy away from that?
yeah.
So, I mean, there's a whole 44 different characteristics. We have you look at both your weaknesses and your strengths. And the other understanding is every strength has a corresponding weakness.
Yeah. The
So when
shadow.
it comes, so when it comes to attacking, that's one of the A's for Pink Goldfish, is sometimes you need to attack your competition. Well, you can actually play to what their potential weaknesses are compared to your strengths and what makes you different. But
Yeah.
I was going to say the awareness bit, to your point, is absolutely key. But there's a second A to that, which is what we call it acceptance,
Mm,
right? So you do the work of asking your customers and your employees and your suppliers. And that's a hard look in the mirror. Not a lot of people want to look at that mirror and ask that question. But once you do, you've got to like wrap your arms around it and accept it.
mm.
And
Yeah.
that's, and even appreciate it, like go beyond just accepting it, going, yeah, that's what makes us unique. Then you get into what we call alignment,
4
right?
A's.
So alignment is, how are you showing up? Is that uniqueness being portrayed on your website
Mm,
or at your office or in your showroom or in your packaging,
mm,
right? And then once you do that, then you get to the fun part, and this is more of the design part, is what we call amplify.
mm,
So how do you do more of some things and how do you do less of others? How do you turn up the dial
mm,
to 11, or how do you turn it in some cases down to 0?
mm.
Yeah.
The 5 A's. 5 A's.
There's actually 6. Yeah.
Oh,
So
is
there's
it?
augment and attack are
Um,
the 6. So it starts with
okay.
awareness, acceptance,
Acceptance,
alignment,
alignment,
amplify, augment,
augment, and attack.
and attack. Yeah.
Oh, that's really nice. Okay. Awesome. So we from pink now we have to cover yellow because here again it's such an interesting topic when you say that contributing to the happiness of customers, employees, and society, happiness is the ultimate currency in business. Okay,
Right.
now you've got to elaborate with examples because, yes, at least even when we're talking brands, Stan, and we are like, okay, what are we going to communicate? And whether it's an ice cream or a pizza or a bank
Right.
or a financial service, everybody wants to convey that they are about happiness because that's the ultimate a human being wants. Yes.
Right.
But how do you differentiate doing that and still play in that space? That's the most relevant, ultimate. I mean, any laddering that you do, starting from attribute, functional benefit, emotional benefit, and then, what is the ultimate thing? It will come to happiness.
Yeah, it is.
So how do you do this? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think first off, you have to understand how important it is. And then I think you need to put it at the center of what you do. We talk about happiness being kind of the fifth iteration of business. So we only have to go back less than 100+ years ago for when the modern corporation was developed, right? And the 1.0 version of business, Jazz Ravi, the shareholder was at the center, right? Everything you did was to maximize the return to that shareholder. And to me that was a very limited way of looking at business, right? But that was for the first 60 or 70 years of the modern corporation. It wasn't till about 50 years ago that the tide started to turn on that. And the insight was, no. Maybe instead of putting the shareholders first, maybe we actually need to put the customer first. And we put them at the center of everything we do. And if we fulfill their needs, right, and we make sure that they're happy, ultimately they buy more, we become more profitable, and then the shareholders benefit, right? And I think, if that was in the 1970s, I think about 20 years later, in the 1990s, there was the 3.0 version. And the 3.0 version was simply this. It's like, maybe your employees should come first, right? That if we focus on the employees we have and we realize we can't have happy, enthused customers unless we have happy, engaged employees. So we put our employees first, our customers second, right? And then ultimately, the shareholders benefit because you've got engaged team members, and engaged organizations grow 3 times as faster as those with not engaged employees, right? Their turnover is greatly reduced. They're more productive if you have an engaged team. So the 4.0, which I think you only have to go back to about 2010, the 4.0 version of business was putting purpose at the center of what you do and understanding why you're in business and who are you for, right? And if you get the purpose right, and then you put your employees second, right? They get bought into whatever that purpose is. Your customers are fourth, and ultimately, on the outer ring of this like kind of bullseye is your shareholders. Happiness to me is the 5.0 version, right? It's putting happiness. It's almost like the sun at the center of what you do. And really, if you get that right, and you've got that focus on your purpose and how you're giving back to society, contributing to the happiness of society as a whole, if you're contributing to the happiness of your employees, right? You're fulfilling the lives of your customers, right? And making them happier. And then ultimately at that outer ring, you're successful and you're contributing to your shareholders. And so Rosaria Lauman, she's Italian, but she lives in the Netherlands. We got together, and just as I've done with all of my other books, have looked to organizations that have really put happiness at the forefront, and then to try to determine the ways that you can do it. And so the book is, loaded with a lot of great case studies of companies that have tapped into these 9 different ways to drive happiness.
I love that. This is a 5.0. I mean, beyond purpose. Stan, which companies would you say are inherently, instinctively working with this at the core? Would you say some companies have actually done it, whether small, big, that happiness is at the central core, like the sun, like the G.L.U.E series of the book?
Yeah, so it's a lot of companies that I think you probably know. Like so Southwest Airlines, to me, is a great company that here in the U.S. They have a heart as part of their logo. They just rebranded a number of years ago. They're all about hiring team members that care, that have a high sense of empathy. They're about delivering that, letting them go to deliver this great experience. And if you look online, there's a ton of great videos on how they do the safety announcement, but it's like they'll sing it or do a rap or a comedy routine, just to bring a little bit of difference and happiness to their customers. And so they're an example of a company. Another one of my favorite examples from the project is from GE, and GE creates these MRI machines. And I've been fortunate; I've never had to go into an MRI, but I've heard it's a pretty harrowing experience, right? You just feel like, and the sounds and the whole thing. Well, GE created these MRI machines specifically for children. And if you can imagine what the experience is like as an adult, it was just horrible if you were a kid. And so there's a great story in the book on how the person that was so proud because they created this new machine for children, and then watched how awful the experience was for kids, right? And they would have to retake scans because the kids would move because they would get freaked out, and it would take a while to get them to coax them into the machine, and the parents, the staff was frazzled. And so they rethought this experience with the concept of play, which is one of the 9 ways of creating this yellow goldfish for happiness. And so they actually painted the machine and the entire room around like a theme. And so that MRI machine became like a pirate ship. And as you walked in, there were steps in the room that led you up to the ship. And there was a whole story about how you went into the machine. And they just made it a much better experience for happier staff, happier customers, right? Happier shareholders. They were becoming a lot more productive with the scans, and they weren't having to retake them. So it was a little thing that benefited everyone, and even happier from a societal level, because now you have the ability to scan more kids and potentially uncover illness. So that's one of the stories I really love about rethinking the experience and bringing a little bit of happiness to it.
Awesome. And I believe there would be a lot of purple in the G.L.U.E as well, like you were sharing, because the little things, but yes, the why and the how will be focused on. Does it spread happiness? Does it spread the sunshine?
Absolutely. And I have an entire book in the series, which is the red goldfish, which is focused entirely on purpose. And one of the ways of the 9 types for happiness, there's 2 P's: play and purpose. So yeah, purpose is right at the forefront. and one of the key ways.
Mm. So it's that kind of an enduring anchor, which is going to make happy in the long run, and the joy of doing it also is going to be more because you are making a true difference.
Right.
Awesome, awesome. So I don't know if there is time to cover the blue goldfish, but I'm just thinking that the blue one is going to feel bad. So quickly, in 2 lines, I think our audiences would at least like to know that there is another way to differentiate and create an experience. So the 3 R's: relationship, responsiveness, and readiness.
Right.
So how do you turn insights into action? If with one example, if you could share, then.
Spent about 5 years working with IBM as a futurist, and I really saw the role that technology was going to play in being able to improve the experience that you provided, right? And to use all of this data in a way that you could drive insight and provide a better experience. So one of my favorite examples in that entire project comes from a bank in Australia called Westpac. And Westpac, 100 million transactions from their customers. They have all this information about buying patterns and, the things that they have. Plus they have, million plus customers that they have this amazing. So they actually did a lot of data work to start to understand the different products that customers would need at different life stages. Does that make sense? So they could anticipate what somebody was needing before maybe they even knew it themselves. And so they created this thing called the Know Me program. So whenever you went into the branch and you maybe did a transaction, for about 2 of every 3 customers, they would know what they potentially would need next. And they put a standing offer in the system. And at the end of the transaction, the teller or the customer service representative would say, hey, we think you would benefit by this product or service. And they would make the offer. And here's the thing, because it was personalized, it was relevant to them, they converted 46% of those offers the first year of the program. And if you think about it, now they took that customer that maybe have had 2 or 3 products with the bank. So the average customer has about 2.5 banking products. Now they've taken them to 3 or maybe 4 products or services. And we know the more that you serve someone, the more loyal they become, the less they will jump to another, financial institution. So not only did it drive a ton of product, ton of revenue to the bottom line, but it just made those relationships a lot stronger. And it was done from the idea of knowing your customers and using that insight to be able to drive your behavior. So I only have one book that doesn't have goldfish as part of the title. And so it's something I started over 20 years ago. And about 5 years ago, I finally got it out. So it's a book that's called Bar Tricks, Bad Jokes, and Even Worse Stories. So one of the things that I used to do when I was younger and I was single, I would go out and I used to like to tell jokes and stories. But one of the things I picked up along the way is what we call bar tricks. So bar tricks are not like magic tricks. They're just simple things that you can do if you were in a bar that are kind of fun, and then you kind of explain how it's done at the end.
Can we see one?
Sure. So I'm going to have you demonstrate with me, right? So take your left hand, put it out, and then I want you to turn it down like this. point your thumb down the other way. Turn it the other way.
Like this?
There you go. There you go. There you go.
Okay.
And then you're going to take your other hand over like this, and I want you to clasp your fingers together. You got it like that? Great.
Yeah.
Great. So now what I want you to do is hold from that position right there, right? Like this. And I want you to go up and out. So again, it's a bar trick. So
it is a trick, yes.
It is impossible
It's
to do it
tricky.
from it's impossible to do it from that first position when you're interlocking and doing it. So what you do when you're sharing the trick is after you've done it, you take your hands off, and then people aren't really watching. You put your hands together like this, and you turn them over, and it looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
and then you do it. So that's an example of a bar trick.
Interesting.
Oh, I love it.
You must be familiar with it. So quickly, we are going to shoot some questions at you. And if you take time or you elaborate, then the gun will also be shooting at you.
Okay, I got to be quick. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Mother's best advice.
Don't expect people to act the way that you would.
Alternate profession could have been?
Could have been a comedian.
Yeah. What would you do on Mars for fun?
Play golf.
Okay. One thing no one knows about you.
I have webbed toes.
Okay, if you say so. A book you'd like to gift to all your friends, and it can't be your own.
I really like a book called The Human Brand.
What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Take more chances.
What's something new happening in your life right now?
I'm going to go to the Philippines next month, and it's the first time I've ever been to that country, so I'm excited.
What's your greatest joy?
Probably my kids.
So it's a wrap up now. Stan, would you like to share any online addresses, any emails through which our audiences can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So couple of things. I spend the majority of my time on LinkedIn. So look me up, Stan Phelps on LinkedIn. My website is stanphelps.com. And if you want to email me, it's pretty simple. Stan, STAN, at purplegoldfish.com.
It will be there in the show notes also.
I enjoyed the conversation. I can tell you're passionate like I am about business and not being afraid to go to the edge, right? And so I appreciate that, and I enjoyed it.
Yay! Guys, like, share, and subscribe. Stan, it was wonderful to host you. Thank you so much for the pearls of wisdom and of so many colors.